Thrilled to be here. Thank you for that wonderful introduction, Michael. My name is Dahlia Marin. Again, I'm an integrative registered dietitian, a certified gastrointestinal nutritionist, and I'm one of the co-founders of Married to Health.
I'm James Marin. I'm an integrative registered dietitian, environmental nutritionist, and one of the co-founders of Married to Health. So thank you all so much for being here. I'll go ahead and click to the next. So what we're going to be talking about today, you're going to hear more about us. You're going to then we're going to get into where did our gut come from? What is the human gut? Where did it come from? What is the gut microbiome? We're going to get into what can happen with the gut in terms of gut issues like SIBO and IBS and beyond. More importantly, the next item is restoring the gut microbiome. How do we do that? What does that look like? And really, that's where we kind of develop protocols. We really encompass that with what we call heal with each meal. That's based on research. That's one of our mantras. Feel with each meal is another one of our mantra where there's other aspects to take into account. And then we'll discuss real patients and answer your questions. So we're really excited.
And if you'd like to follow along with other things that we have going on at Married to Health, feel free to follow us on all platforms. But we really, truly are here to help you and your family and those who you love most heal with each meal. And that sounds really easy. It sounds very simple, but we're going to get into the weeds of what that means, especially if you're somebody who's dealing with gastrointestinal or gut issues. And we truly do believe that you can heal with each meal, whether that's you healing your relationship with the food and you are feeling with each meal, whether that is using the food as medical nutrition therapy, or really just understanding the ins and outs of how that food is interacting, especially with your gut microbes, because I'm sure you've all heard by now, we are much more microbial DNA than we are human DNA. So we're going to really get into talking about how you can heal with each meal and heal your gut bugs with each meal as well.
And we are not alone in this mission. It's us, and we have five other integrative registered dietitians, all with different specialties. So we do have a team of integrative and many plant-based registered dietitians, whether it's cancer, whether it's your pediatric, your kids and your family, whether it's metabolic issues and weight loss, as well as gut. We do see a lot of gut-related patients, whether that's IBS, SIBO, IBD, gastritis, reflux. The list goes on and on and on.
All right, perfect. So we're
Perfect.
excited to get into things and get started on talking all things gut.
So we believe the human gut microbiota is the nexus of all health on this planet. What that simply means is really gut health is at the root. And being an integrative practitioner, integrative registered dietitian, what that really means is we like to get to the root. We like to get to the why. Many of what we've been doing the last 80 to 100 years is really going, oh, you have symptoms? Let's just eliminate those symptoms. Let's just treat the symptoms. What an integrative dietitian or integrative doctor or integrative health professional does is go, well, yeah, we see those symptoms there. And yeah, we're going to definitely get to that. But we want to look deeper. Why did those symptoms even occur in the first place? What are the roots? And that's really why we came to gut health is understanding that, oh, wow, within our body, there is this ecosystem and it's alive and thriving in many, many people. And it's very much active and changing. And this ecosystem is made up of viruses and bacteria, fungi, protozoa, archaea. We won't go into all the microbiology today in the time we have, but it's really important to know. I think one of the coolest facts, and maybe many of you have heard this, I know many, many have not, but you're actually a super organism. So you're one organism, or what appears to be one organism, but you're made up of many other organisms and actually many other ecosystems, and they're all working together. What does that kind of remind you of? It really reminds us of the earth. It reminds us of the ecosystems we see at large, where you look at a big piece of land and you find out, oh, there's deserts and there's mountains and there's ocean, all with their own ecosystems. So really what's beautiful with that is as our body really resembles the ecosystems we see in the outside world, that really tells and paints the picture of the story of where our gut came from, really. Because as many, many studies have shown, and as we're understanding more and more, we're really getting our gut microbiome and the human microbiome from our environment. And in this diagram, from a really great kind of review and analysis study done in 2019, we really found that the plant microbiome, the soil microbiome, is influencing the human microbiome through a number of variables. And then as we kind of moved into the Industrial Revolution, as we kind of got disconnected, we're seeing that we have then pesticides and other environmental factors, and we'll get into more of that as well, kind of disrupting this cycle of connection, kind of disrupting how we replenish and how we know our gut microbiome today versus how we knew it 500 years ago or 1,000 years ago. So really, this is painting a picture of like, oh, that's why we have these microbes in and on us, because really the microbiome, the human microbiome, has actually the bigger impact now on the outside microbiome and the outside ecosystem. So we like to say this ecosystem right here, you literally have it with you all the time, has the biggest impact on this ecosystem, like you're seeing, right? These big ecosystems, rainforest, right? Think of your favorite park, think of your favorite national forest, or wherever you like to visit. It's actually your gut that has the biggest impact on that. And so you may think, why? Like, how is that possible? And really, it's important. I like to kind of go through this to paint this picture of what's going on. Well, really, humans are the only ones that can drastically change landscapes. Yes, other animals can do that, but not as, I would say, robust for better or worse, or as efficient for better or worse. Than humans, right? And we really see this in this graph where we're looking at farms, and you may think that, and I'll explain that, but really we're seeing the number of small family farms decreasing, while the average farm size is increasing. So really this means, hey, we're moving away from these smaller ecosystems where families and people are really connected to the land and managing the land in a healthy way, and we're moving to more of these big monocrop systems, which we've all known and been seeing for the last, again, same amount of time, 80 to 100 years. It's been this move, but really what this is doing is creating less hyperlocal farming. There's farm consolidation, and there's methods to increase yield versus methods to increase nutrition. And more importantly, what that does is decrease microbes. So we're in Orange County, California, and many kids today, as an example, don't know why it's called Orange County. They're just like, oh, it's just called Orange County. Well, no, it's because we grew oranges. We were one of the largest producers of citrus in Orange County, and that makes sense. That's why it's called Orange County. Now you don't really see many citrus trees. There's some in people's backyards, but that's about it. And now this generation's like, why is it even called Orange County? Because it's changed so rapidly. So as we kind of see this play out where the disease in our body is running rampant, we're also seeing the disease outward in the environment. What we need more of is complementary planting, this hyperlocal farming, composting and mulching, all these wonderful things, right? Because what that does is create healthy soil, a healthy soil microbiome, and nutrient-dense foods. At the same time, what we need less of are these big kind of monocrops and CAFOs, and essentially we are creating incentives to increase profit and transport and not increase nutrient density as well as microbial density. And that's why you're seeing it kind of play out in silos where now you need to take a probiotic supplement and you need all these supplements and all these other things to kind of complement or to replace what we're missing. But really, that is not integrative, right? We need to go to the root and say, why don't we build in inherently in every neighborhood, in every city, in every county, this connection to healthy soil? And so why and when we do that is really this understanding of we are inside out plants, right? It's really cool to parallel the inside from the outside. And so when you look at a plant, plants use microbes outward. So the microbes in the root system, which is called the rhizosphere, and the soil microbiome, they use those microbes to actually break down rocks. You can think of minerals, and they're getting the zinc and copper and manganese and the nutrients that are in the soil and absorbing it through the roots. Humans use microbes inward to pull nutrients outward to the rest of the body. So it's literally the same process, just in reverse and just in a slightly different ecosystem and environment, but it's the same idea. So it's really cool to think, especially those who are like maybe not fans of plants, we really resemble plants and we're obtaining pretty almost about a majority of our microbes from plants and soil and plant matter. So it's very, very cool to kind of think of that and look at that juxtaposition. Um, we also see this play out and this juxtaposition play out when we start to see the outside ecosystem resemble what's happening in the human ecosystem. So again, all this is just painting a picture of the gut. What is the gut? What's happening to the gut? So as we're seeing more of these monocrops in agriculture, we're seeing people shift to a low diversity diet, where we've all heard the stories of kids who don't know what this vegetable is, or, we see it in our practice of patients who come to us and say, I only eat about two vegetable types a day. Like maybe I'll eat some celery and a cucumber, which technically cucumbers are fruit. So it's like, wow, okay. All right, what else do you eat? And there's not really much diversity and quality when it comes to plants. We're seeing this in fertilizers, where as we increase fertilizers because of the short-sighted monocrops we're using, we're now increasing in supplements, right? It's kind of the same thing. A fertilizer is a supplement for the soil. Supplements, dietary supplements, are fertilizers for the human soil, right? Um, we're seeing this also play out in pesticides. What are pesticides? Essentially, pesticides are an umbrella category for herbicides and rodenticides and fungicides and all these sides, which means death. And so we're seeing this with disinfectants, right? Where as we disinfect the soil on the outside in the larger scale, we're also disinfecting our homes more. We're being told to disinfect and use hand sanitizer and sanitize, and sterilize our homes. And so we're seeing that play out. And so this can continue, but CAFOs, we're packing our animals together. We're getting more cities and skyscrapers. We're packing humans together. A soil dysbiosis. I saved the best for last. Soil dysbiosis, we're seeing a gut dysbiosis. And really, why these parallel so well is because we are connected, is because at the end of the day, you can't escape the fact that you are nature, nature is you, and you're inherently connected. And so what does this mean? There is hope. It's not, we're here to bring a message of hope. The hope is in regenerative healthcare and regenerative nutrition, regenerative soil. So really this idea of regeneration can be inherent in this creation, in the soil, in us. And so there is a movement to do this. Other health professionals are practice as well. And specifically, many really integrative practitioners are understanding this. We've even started our own inner ecosystem collective, bringing together other health professionals and food brands. It's part of our regenerative nutrition initiative at Married to Health. And really, it's because over the last several years, we've been diving into the research, understanding where the gut's coming from, and understanding that we really can't do this alone. We need all of you. We need other food companies. We need other doctors and dietitians and chiropractors, whoever is kind of understanding this to really come together, plant seeds, and really bring this diversity of people with a really focused mission on regenerative nutrition and regenerative healthcare. So I'll kind of lean into gut issues for a little bit here. So now we get to some of the root of the problem, which is, okay, now what are the gut issues we're seeing? Well, we like to say, listen to your GI symptoms. Without them, you might never know something isn't right in your good gut. So symptoms are not, I don't want to say doom and gloom, right? Like symptoms are not the end of the world. Symptoms are actually a good thing. We like to shift perspective on symptoms. Symptoms are your body's way of letting you know something is not right. And so I know this looks a little crazy here, but we tried to really conceptualize this as the gut microbiome spiral, where again, the gut is the nexus, the gut is the epicenter, and all around it, you'll have the mesenteric system and pancreas and gallbladder and your thyroid and your brain and your eyes and your teeth. And this can get way more detailed, but really everything is kind of centered and spiraling around the gut. And what we can do is We can have the healthy gut microbiome spiral where we think of these green kind of beams kind of coming out as like a positive effect, and they're bidirectional, so it can come from the outside in and from the inside out. This is where you'll hear of everything being a gut something connection, right? There's a gut brain connection, there's a gut environment connection, there's the gut feet connection, right? Everything is connected to the gut. So and again, you'll have differentiation where you'll have that person in your life where they could eat anything. They can go out to fast food and eat the burger and fries and milkshake and soda, and they're fine. They have no issues. You're like, man, where's that coming from? Well, it's genetics, environment, trauma. There's a lot of factors, right? But you can have your maybe someone who has a very strong gut, or you're doing things right and you're eating great fiber and plants, and it's creating this beautiful effect, this healthy gut spiral. On the other hand, you can have this, what we're calling the gut microbiome disease spiral, right? Where maybe things aren't going well, but they'll present differently. And as Dahlia will soon explain, every single one of our patients is slightly different and slightly unique. And that is because not only can the spiral be set up in a way that's completely unique and different, it's our genetics, like I mentioned, it's what you eat, it's your supplements, medication. There's so many factors that go into this. But that is why someone with maybe dysbiosis or gut problems, it's affecting their, as you can see, uterus and skin mainly, and a little bit of their teeth. Whereas another person, it's kind of affecting their bladder and their brain, where they're getting brain fog, or another person they're having prostate and liver issues, and another person it's lungs and gallbladder. So it'll affect us all differently. And this is literally because the gut microbiome diffuses and permeates into surrounding organs. It's literally all connected. And so if you're having issues in the gut, if there's what we call a dysbiosis, which is really just an off balance, then it'll permeate into other organ systems, into other areas of the body. All right.
So, we want to get into the weeds of this a little bit more and really explain how people arrive to having very significant gut issues. I think all of us can think of at least one person we know, whether it's ourselves, a friend, a family member, someone who at every meal is picking things off their plate, is saying that they're in discomfort or pain. And this does not usually happen overnight. Like James said, symptoms are a blessing, right? They're our body's way of communicating with us. And a lot of times with my patients, when they come to me and they're having the severe symptoms that really motivated them to seek help, they do reflect back and say, oh, yeah, these things have been there. And I always say symptoms usually start out with our body whispering to us, like, hey, something's off. Then it starts talking to us. And oftentimes we really just start paying attention when it's screaming at us. And when that disease spiral starts to form, and now people are saying, oh my gosh, my skin is awful at this time, or my bladder is so uncomfortable, it's disrupting my sleep, it's disrupting my life. I'm really experiencing liver pain and liver discomfort, or I've been diagnosed with metabolic disease. And so then we start tracing things back and we start to go back down through that spiral and really ask, when did this start? How did this start? What were some of the clues and signs and symptoms that you've been experiencing all the while that really clued you into something was off? And instead of being this beautiful flourishing garden, if you will, the gut has become a little bit more desolate, a little bit more difficult to manage, and it's really crying out for help. And we do know we live in a world that makes it increasingly harder to protect our gut microbiome. Even if we are controlling what we can control, I have so many people tell me, I do all the things that I feel like I should. I'm exercising, I'm eating all the foods that are recommended for me to eat. I take my probiotic. We know there are other things that are a little bit outside of our control, or maybe happened to us at a time in our lives where we had less control over what was going on. So we do know one, trauma, especially early adverse life events. I cannot speak to this enough because I do still speak with people who are in their 60s, 70s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and they're still experiencing the same nervous system dysregulation as they were from something that occurred to them at 4 or 5 years old, and that can manifest in their gut. We do know also stress and chemicals and things that are in, on, and around our body can alter the balance of bugs in our gut. We do know our immune system is heavily rooted in the gut. 70 to 80% of our immune cells are in what's called the gut-associated lymphoid tissue. So if something offsets the immune system, it's very likely going to offset the gut. For example, there were so many studies that did show that the COVID-19 virus did significantly alter the gut microbiome, creating a more inflammatory, a more imbalanced gut microbiome. We do know that those changes can also lead to alterations in the nerves in the gut and how sensitive they are to perceiving changes in pressure, gas, bloat, inflammation. And that can then lean into altering the flow of the gut. The motility is what that's called, and we're going to talk about that more. We do know then that that can alter what's happening in the brain and our neurotransmitters. We do know that IBS, for example, is a disease or disorder of the gut-brain connection. And we always used to think that the brain was kind of the epicenter. The brain controlled us and controlled what we did. We are now really discovering that there is that strong connection between gut and brain, and actually more signals go from gut to brain than brain to gut. We actually have 80% of signals that go from the gut to the brain. Only 20% of signals go from the brain to the gut. So it does beg the question, who really is in control? Is it the brain or is it the bugs in the gut? Because they're also synthesizing hormones and neurotransmitters and things that are going to affect how we feel, how we act, how we just live in this world. So again, we're taking things in, we're also putting things out from the gut. And so with all of that, that can lead to some of these changes in a couple different key pieces of the gut. So I always say a healthy, well-functioning gut has these three intact functions: the structure or the barrier, the function or the flow or motility, and the population. So the population of both opportunist, inflammatory bugs, and commensal or healthy or anti-inflammatory bugs, they're in beautiful balance. It's called eubiosis. We've all heard of dysbiosis, when things are out of balance. So if those three things, the structure, the function, population, are all in line, all functioning the way that they really need to, then one has daily healthy bowel movements. They have an inexcessive and non-malodorous amount of gas. They really should not have any gastrointestinal symptoms that are occupying their attention and taking up their day. And they're usually thriving in health. Just like James said, there's that gut health spiral. So they're kind of spiraling out into all of their gut supporting organs and all of the rest. And we know that this can also go the other way. So when we see any changes in structure, function, and population, we might then start to experience some of these symptoms. And again, the degree to which the symptoms are speaking to you usually depend on the degree to which one of these or all three of these things could be off. So we're going to get into why someone might experience bloating, excessive or malodorous gas, constipation, diarrhea, just any change in bowel movements. They might have reflux, indigestion, nausea, early satiety, food intolerances, even food allergies. All of these are going to be mediated by those little bugs that are living in the gut. And I always say, think of it as kind of an apartment building. When things are off in the gut, you could have maybe inadvertently welcomed in an unhealthy tenant who just didn't tend to the space very well. So they kind of caused chaos, they caused damage in the environment, and they also encouraged more of their friends to come live in this apartment building that they're just conveniently destroying. So first, we want to work on one, evicting them. So you're working on getting a better balance of tenants in your gut microbiome. You need to move them out and improve motility. And then after they're out, then we work on repairing the walls and really redecorating that apartment to hopefully move someone else better and healthier back in. So that's kind of the analogy that I'd love for you to be thinking of as we're talking about some of these gut issues, because we do know after there is that buildup of just unsavory characters in the gut, or, even just accomplices to them who maybe aren't causing their own damage, but just wrong place, wrong time, then that will damage the home. That will damage the structure. That will damage this apartment building that we're talking about. So we've all heard about leaky gut, right? And this really does occur after quite a bit has already gone on. So there has to be that move in of these unsavory characters. They're then usually going to not just feed on what you're feeding on. So they'll not just feed on your food, they'll also then start to say, ooh, there's this beautiful, rich layer of mucus that lays in this structure, right? The apartment insulation is really, really fruitful for me. So maybe if I start ripping it out and selling it or consuming it, it's going to help me in some way, shape, or form. So they will actually start eating up that protective layer of mucus that we all have that lines the really thin skin in our gut. I think people think of the gut as a muscular organ. They imagine in their minds a heart or a liver, and they see this very dense muscular organ. That's not your gut. So make no mistake about it. The gut epithelia, the gut skin, if you will, is actually thinner than our external skin. So it's a pretty delicate organ, and it is such an important organ. So our body is intelligent enough to then say, well, it needs some protection. So let me make sure I have mucus. But again, when it's overrun with those bugs that maybe shouldn't be there or just are unhealthy types of bugs, they'll start to say, okay, well, I need to get up to the innards. I need to really do my thing and cause some damage. Let me just break down this mucus barrier. And inevitably, as we start to break down the protective barrier, then the walls themselves begin to get damaged. And as that happens, we've all heard of leaky gut. It's called intestinal hyperpermeability. And we do know that this can be temporary. So studies do show that even after one meal that's very rich, very high in saturated fats, or after one extremely intense spurt of exercise, after a very intensive, stressful day, or if you're suddenly inoculated by too many microbes, maybe you got food poisoning or gastroenteritis, that can cause leaky gut in just one day. So it could be acute, it could be temporary, or it could be more chronic, more prolonged. So this could be long-term dysbiosis. This could be issues with that flow, that function, that motility. And then from there, once we do know the mucus barrier is low or damaged, the skin barrier itself, the gut epithelia is damaged, then they're leaking out outside of that gut-associated lymphoid tissue, and they're then reaching your larger immune system. So they're reaching the immune system that resides in the blood and in the lymph. And so this can lead to things like increased food intolerances or even allergies. We've seen things like histamine response, which I'm so thankful more and more practitioners are now talking about, something I talk about on a daily basis. It's going to really alert the nerves that are surrounding that gut. And so one could then have more what's called visceral hypersensitivity. Those nerves are just more sensitive to, oh, there's inflammatory bugs here. There's more bloat, there's more gas, there's more changes here. And then ultimately, we do know autoimmunity and even cancer can then develop from prolonged long-term chronic intestinal hyperpermeability. So we want to make sure we try to stop things in their tracks, listen to those symptoms. And if we're sensing that before that happens, that intestinal hyperpermeability happens, if we do find that we have some type of imbalance, we're really addressing it. We do know with IBS, irritable bowel syndrome, especially IBS diarrhea type, IBSD, a predominant cause of that is gastroenteritis. So it is food poisoning. It's a traveler's gut bug. So that's really a change in the balance. Again, you're out of that beautiful synergy, that eubiosis. Now you're into that dysbiosis. And so with that, that can lead to dysmotility. So based on the load of bugs in the gut and based on how the muscles and nerves are functioning in and around the digestive tract, we do know then that will alter the rate at which our gut is moving substances through. So whether that's food, whether that's bacteria and other bugs, whether that is debris, that pace will be altered based on who's living there, what's living there, what's going on in the barrier, the muscles, and the nerves. So we could have it sped up and have diarrhea. We could have it significantly slowed down and then be experiencing constipation. We could experience both. I have some people who tell me from one day to the next, I have dry rabbit pellet stools that are like grapes that I'm forcing out. And then the next day I'm rushing to the restroom and it's liquid. So there's so many things that can play into, again, that rate of movement, that motility. So this could also be things like pelvic floor issues. We have this bowl of muscles called the pelvic floor, and those hold up your digestive tract, your rectum, your reproductive organs, the bladder. And if something's off again in those nerves and muscles, ultimately that will dictate the rate at which you can expel the waste that your body did not intend to keep. We could have scar tissue from past injuries or surgeries. We could have adhesions that usually are growing either from scar tissue or inflammation, and inflammation is usually coming from bugs. We could, again, have nerve dysfunction or nervous system dysfunction. Again, I explained that the IBS is a disorder of the gut-brain connection. So when our nervous system is dysregulated and dysfunctional, our gut ultimately will become dysregulated and dysfunctional as well. And there's so many players in that. Again, so many hormones, so many neurotransmitters, muscles, nerves, so many things are really happening at the same time. So there could be one major player that's offsetting this whole cascade. There could just be a wide variety of those things. So it's up to a really highly specialized practitioner to help you determine that and really help you determine also who is supposed to live in your gut, who is over functioning, who is in a place they shouldn't be. We all know that stool tests are all the rage these days. And I have people bring me stool tests from them self-ordering them. They might have had a chiropractor order it for them, or they might have had a gastroenterologist order it for them. And I think it's fine anywhere in that spectrum as long as the person who's ordering it knows how to interpret it. So if you're unfamiliar with how to interpret these stool tests, I wouldn't recommend that you order yourself one because I've seen people see flags on there and then overreact and hyperreact. So, for example, H. pylori is one thing that could come up on one of those functional stool tests. But it's not just the fact that it's high. You could have non-virulent H. pylori. That means it's non-active, it's non-aggressive, it's non-threatening. A large percentage of the world's population does have that H. pylori bacteria in their intestines. So it could be living in the stomach, it could be living in the colon. And if you're doing a stool test, that means it's in your colon. So if you're just seeing on the test, I have high H. pylori, let me take the strongest killing agents, let me take grapefruit seed extract, and let me take walnut and wormwood, you might not have had an active form of H. pylori. And so often I actually have people come to me and say, well, so and so who ordered this for me told me I have H. pylori. And then I started taking all these crazy things to kill off that H. pylori. And now I have severe IBS. I have debilitating diarrhea. I have not had a regular bowel movement since. I have the worst gut hypersensitivity. So again, no matter who's ordering it for you, you really want to get an understanding of how familiar are you with interpreting this test. So it's not just who can order it, it's who can properly interpret it for you to really assess who should be living there and who shouldn't. And, we do know that there are so many things that play into, again, who moved into our gut apartment. Was there any influence of antibiotics? What did that look like for you in your entirety of your lifetime? Have they been very sparse, maybe less than a handful of times, or has it been a handful of times every month for you since you were born? You want to understand what has been your exposure to pesticides, whether you're someone handling pesticides, because again, your skin is a medium for things to get into your gut, or is it just consumption of pesticides? Because as James mentioned, any of those sides are basically killers. What has been your experience in consumption with additives into foods, especially binders, gums, and emulsifiers, because we do know those can bind to our gut bugs, whether they're healthy or unhealthy. What has been your life stress? What has your motility pattern looked like? All of these things are going to dictate how many of those either healthy tenants we have in our gut or those less than ideal tenants that we have in there who are really not respecting the space and taking care of it and honoring it. So one thing that we always ask, which we'll get into, is what's your gut health story? That's always something I ask, literally from womb to present day. I want to know, did your mom have gut issues? Because she can transmit bugs to you, even in utero? Were you breastfed? Were you vaginally delivered or C-section delivered? Were you colicky as a baby? Because now we're really understanding colic is usually gut inflammation. What else was really influencing and impacting the balance of bugs in your gut? So again, when the structure or the barrier, when the function or the motility or the flow, when the population is off, that can then lead to a wide variety of these gut symptoms. And we know that IBS is on the rise. So usually if somebody has an alteration in bloat, discomfort, and or bowel movements for multiple days a month for several months in a row, usually that collection of symptoms is then diagnosed as this disease or this disorder called IBS, irritable bowel syndrome. And worldwide, we know 1 in 7 people are suffering from IBS, and it is a little bit more elevated in the United States. We have about 10 to 15% of our population here in the US who is diagnosed with IBS. And we know it's one of the number one causes people seek out medical attention. So it's one of the number one reasons that people are seeing their doctor or finding a dietitian. We know, unfortunately, now colorectal cancer is the fastest rising cancer in those 20 to 50. So our gut is really screaming at us as a population at large. So we really need to lean in and start to understand what is causing this irritable bowel. Why is our bowel irritable? What is it trying to communicate to us? Which one of those three main components is off? The structure, the function, the population. So if we are one of those people, again, who's been diagnosed with this disorder of the gut-brain connection, we really want to understand, one, what type do I have? Do I have it with constipation, with diarrhea? Is it mixed? Or is it uncategorized? I maybe don't fit in any of those things, but something is off. I'm missing work. I'm missing out on life. I have people who say, I just don't even go to restaurants anymore. If my friends and family are going out to eat, I just don't even join them. It makes me depressed because I can't even eat what they're eating. I feel like an outsider. Just being around them makes my stomach hurt. So I'm missing out on life. And then again, that can psychologically affect who you are as a person. So we do know, like we mentioned, you could still be checking off all the boxes. I ate my fiber, had my 30 different plants this week. I ate my 4 to 6 servings of fermented foods as is recommended. I'm exercising every day. Maybe I'm sleeping well, and I'm still bloated, gassy, I'm refluxy, et cetera, et cetera. And we know now plants are not the cause of gastrointestinal disease and disorder. Yes, they can exacerbate it. So we do know that, especially fermentable plants. So fermentable carbohydrates usually are found in plant foods. But that's why we're now hearing about diets that are saying, oh, you have those symptoms? Just don't eat something that's going to tell you what's going on. So we have people who say, I tried to go vegan, I tried to go plant-based, I tried to go Mediterranean, and it didn't work. And now we're adding more confusion, not just of what we're feeling, but what we're hearing externally as well. We have these experts. And again, you always want to question, what is this person's background? But now we're having experts and healthcare professionals say, oh, plants bother you? Just don't eat them. Just avoid them. That's your cure. But are you truly cured? Because lack of symptoms does not equal healing. I cannot reiterate that enough. Lack of symptoms does not equal healing. If you are eating a plant and you know you're not actually allergic to it and you're experiencing symptoms with it, that means that you have work to do on your gut. It's not the plant. We always like to say we aren't gassy. They aren't gassy plants. We're gassy people. And so if our bugs are flowing, functioning, moving as they should, they're going to handle those plants, extract nutrients from those plants, antioxidants from those plants, and they're going to feel great. It's really when we find ourselves in what James and I like to call gut debt, that creates more nuance, and we need to really lean into that and try to understand it a little bit more. So with this analogy with gut debt, we think of it as, hey, maybe you were out there having a good time, right? You're like, YOLO, I'm going to spend all my money. I'm going to use then credit cards. I'm going to rack up credit card debt. Whatever. I'm hearing that that's not good for me. but I'm living my best life right now. And so that might be fine at that moment. You might not feel it at that moment. Maybe you're in your 20s and maybe you haven't had great financial advice. So you're just doing it all. And then you come into your 30s, you settle down, you want to buy a home, and you go to the bank and ask for a loan, and they're like, no, you have terrible credit. You're in horrible debt. So oftentimes that is what happens. People say, I don't get it. I tried going whatever. I tried eating a Mediterranean diet. I tried eating 80% plants and I feel horrible. It must be the plants. Well, no, have that honest reflection and say, what happened in my past life? What did my gut debt look like? What have you been racking up? Were you racking up antibiotics? Were you racking up substances that affected the way that your nerves were functioning? Did you experience lots of injuries, especially in your pelvic floor or any type of spinal injury that could affect the nerves that are really delegating and dictating your gut motility? So, when you're finding the only way that I feel better is to cut out more and more and more and more foods till I'm really only eating protein, that means that you've likely found yourself in significant debt. So just because you can only eat protein and you don't feel any symptoms when you're only eating in protein, that doesn't mean you're out of debt and now you have great gut credit. It means you're still in debt and you have work to do. And we know just like fixing credit can be a pain, right? It's painful. It's humbling for you to say, all right, I messed up and I really need some help. It's so important for us to really reflect on that with our gut debt as well and really ask ourselves what happened either to us or what were we involved in to get ourselves in that debt.
And I want to just add the running away. I mean, the equivalent of that is like I'm changing my phone, I'm changing my address, I'm ripping up the notices
Mm.
of my gut debt, and that is essentially saying I'm not eating cruciferous vegetables. I'm even like AIP kind of flows into there. I'm eliminating potatoes and grains and legumes. And so that's the again the equivalent of like ripping up the notices and changing your email and your number. And you're just kind of and then you're like, oh, great, I feel so much better. Like I'm not getting that stress of like, oh my gosh, I'm seeing these notices, right? I'm not getting that stress of like, oh, I'm feeling these symptoms. But then you're also just not communicating with your body. And remember, I have to reiterate, I know this is a very if you're watching this and you're going to be here with us for 2 hours, congratulations. You're in it, right? You're here for a reason. And it's because you're searching for something. And really, like I mentioned, this all continues to be a story of connection. You have been disconnected for whatever reason, and it was likely for all the factors we mentioned, and we're going to mention other ones. But you've been disconnected from your gut. You've been disconnected from your nerves or your microbiome or your brain health and your lung health and all these things that we can disconnect from. It's now time to get reconnected. It's now time to face the communication, the symptoms head on, get connected. It's going to take some time, it's going to take some work, but it's way better. That is a way better solution than the alternative, which is continue to avoid, continue to find quick fixes, and just hope and pray. And then one day, hopefully, it works out.
Yeah.
99.9% of the time does not. So, without the proper intervention at work.
We're encouraging you do the work that it is required for you to have a great gut credit score. So if you're in gut debt, don't fear. There's always a solution, always things that can be helpful. And for some people, we do know it's more chronic. Maybe they have a more chronic condition that's influencing how their gut feels. So you might need more chronic support. For some people, it's a one-time fix and then they're good again. Maybe their credit wasn't too damaged. So it's going to depend on what you have going on. But we do know that it's important to do this. It's going to dictate your long-term health. We saw that gut spiral and all the things that are influencing it. So we always want to remind people today's gut symptoms are not just always about what you ate today. Again, you want to have that introspective reflection. You want to ask what happened leading up to this meal. Why is it that I can't eat beans? Why is it that when I eat broccoli, it gives me gas that smells like rotten eggs? You really want to ask yourself that because many people with IBS and something called SIBO, which we'll get into, small intestinal bacterial or microbial overgrowth, restrict their diets often excessively and for a prolonged period of time. And they think this will solve the issues. So again, I'm in debt, I'm in debt, I'm in debt. Let me just fly under the radar. Let me just keep ripping things up, ignore. And That seldom works long term. I can tell you that. I've been a practicing dietitian for 11 years. I almost never see that that works as a long-term solution. So we really want to lean into what's going to heal my gut rather than what's going to help me ignore the symptoms, the fix it light, the alert that my body's
Check
trying to give
engine.
me, the check engine. Yes. I clearly don't handle convenience. But with that small intestinal bacterial or microbial overgrowth, we do know that we talked about how prevalent IBS, irritable bowel syndrome, is. Now we want to talk about why it's that prevalent. So a lot of the times my patients come to me so frustrated and they're like, my provider diagnosed me with IBS, but didn't tell me why I have IBS. And again, it is something that is off in one of those three main parts. So with SIBO, that small intestinal bacterial or microbial overgrowth, because it could be outside of bacteria, fungi, something called archaea, we do know that that accounts for 14 to 70% of irritable bowel syndrome. So if you've been diagnosed with IBS, you really want to look into SIBO, IMO, SIFO, and really just try to understand, do I have this? Because we do know, again, that that can lead to those IBS symptoms. And there are many common causes of it: excessive antibiotic use, like I mentioned, food poisoning or post-infectious gastroenteritis, prolonged low fiber, low antioxidant diet where those gut bugs are just starved, the healthy ones. We know hormonal imbalances, whether that's thyroid hormone, sex hormones, any other hormonal imbalance, chronic constipation. And that could be from any of those other things that I mentioned. Like I mentioned, pelvic floor dysfunction, dysfunction of the little valves or little doors that separate and compartmentalize the gastrointestinal tract. So many more. There could be many, many causes. And I even say SIBO is not a root cause diagnosis. So when someone comes to me and they are diagnosed with SIBO, or we're identifying they have SIBO, we're still asking, why did you have this? Why do you have this? How did you get here? What's going on
It's even deeper.
in the structure, the function, the population? So we can say not all IBS is SIBO, but all SIBO is IBS. So again, if you've been told you have SIBO, you do have IBS. You do have irritable bowel syndrome, but we want to ask, why are you irritable bowel? What happened to you? What's going on? And with this condition, with specifically small intestinal microbial overgrowth, I tend to hear common things, and there are documented common symptoms. Very commonly, people will find I wake up with a flat stomach, and once I start eating or drinking anything, once anything is interacting with my gut bugs, I start having progressive bloating to the point where by the end of the day, they might look and or feel 6 to 8 months pregnant. So the distension, which is the appearance, the bloat, which is the sensation, is excessive to the point where I have patients. I just had a patient yesterday. She said, I haven't left my house in 2 weeks. I'm having such a bad SIBO flare, and it was a perfect storm for her. I have patients who say, I can't wear pants. I haven't worn pants in 5 years. So they'll just wear dresses and flowy things because even a waistband of leggings is painful for them. So if you're having that cumulative excessive bloat that's causing that hypersensitivity of nerves, you might want to ask your care team to check in on this for you. They might find because of inflammation and opportunistic inflammatory bugs, they're having mucus or blood in their stool. That's always something you want to bring up to your care team because that should not be happening. That indicates there's a breakdown or excessive inflammation. They might have, again, malodorous gas. So ask yourself, does my gas have a strong smell? Really, if your gut is healthy and everything's in balance and harmony and good flow, your gas should not smell. So it should really smell like nothing. You should not smell the food that you've been eating. That means you're having malabsorption. It shouldn't smell like a petting zoo, an outhouse, or a cow. That indicates methane is present. It shouldn't smell like rotten eggs. So the smell can actually tell you about who's living in your gut, but you shouldn't have malodorous gas. You shouldn't have gas that's in excess of 15 to 20 times a day. And you shouldn't have trapped gas that you can just feel piling up and isn't passing. You should have a healthy daily detox in your bowel movements, in the form of your bowel movements. It shouldn't come out with a strain and constipation. You shouldn't be skipping days, and it shouldn't be just spilling out of you to the point where you're seeing, oh, wow, I just ate that 8 hours ago and it's undigested in my stool. We should also not really be seeing that you're having spontaneous or uncomfortable belching that either is malodorous or feels like it was stuck or feels like you have to belch in order to alleviate some gas. Those can clue you into some of the signs and symptoms that your body's saying, hey, something is off. And again, SIBO is not a root cause. So one of those three major components of the gut is off. And a lot of the times it is dysbiosis. So we do want to identify, do you have an overabundance of some of these bugs? Not all of these are unhealthy bugs. Some of them are just, they're common bugs. They live in the gut, but they can sometimes migrate up to places they don't belong. For example, with methane overgrowth, we're all going to produce methane. We've heard of methane mainly from cows, but if we're excessively constipated, these certain types of gut bugs are called archaea. They start eating that stool, and they're like, "Hey, this is yummy," and they make gas called methane gas. And if there's an excessive enough amount, or there's dysfunction with the little door that separates your large intestine, your colon, from your small intestine, guess what? They're going to go into your small intestine too and be like, all right, I had enough of eating that stool. Let me eat your food now. And they're going to make methane gas there in the small intestine. So that's usually what leads to that upper bloat and that upper distension. But commonly with methane overgrowth, you might experience constipation and then something called overflow diarrhea. So it's not necessarily that daily there's diarrhea. Usually with overflow diarrhea, it's the fact that you got so backed up, your body's desperate and it says, let me just draw in as much water as I can to the colon and just wash the stool out. Usually overflow diarrhea happens every 3 to 4 days. So for the most part, you're constipated. You might have overflow diarrhea once a week or twice a week. Very bloated. Again, smelly stool, smelly gas that smells like that outhouse, that petting zoo, that cow, and bowel movements could even be painful. So that could clue you in. I think I have a methane overgrowth, and then we can test for it too. You could have hydrogen overgrowth. So maybe you have excessive E. coli or Klebsiella, and that can usually result in diarrhea and excessive gas. It could be hydrogen sulfide, where you have different types of gut bugs, Vibrio, Fusobacteria, a very wide variety of different bugs that can take sulfur. So you could be eating sulfur, taking sulfur supplements, and they're going to eat that up and make this type of rotten egg smelling gas. They cause a lot of sensitivity, inflammation, urgency. They can cause diarrhea or constipation, or you could have an overgrowth of the microbes that are in the kind of fungi genus. So you could have yeast or mold, or any type of fungal overgrowth. So usually this comes with constipation, belching, pain right here underneath the ribs, indigestion, bloat. You could have things like oral thrush, that white coating on your tongue, white specks in your stool. So we want to identify who is living in your gut. And again, we can test for these in various ways. So we can do a breath test. That is the gold standard way of testing for small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. And with breath testing currently, you can test for methane, hydrogen, and hydrogen sulfide. We can't test for fungal overgrowth right now via breath. We do know stool testing is still developing, so we don't have a validated FDA-approved stool test just yet outside of things that look for basic parasites, but we are really coming along. So with the right practitioner, if they're trained in reading a functional stool test, that can also tell you, do you have overabundance of any of these bugs living in your colon? And then what did your small intestine tell us? What did breath testing tell us? What are your symptoms telling us? Because then that can help us identify who's living in the small and large intestine.
We're halfway. I want everyone to take a nice deep breath. Take a nice belly breath because it is, as you can see, quite a lot of information and it's excellent information. It's needed information. And I want to point out something from the beginning of the connection. You see, not a lot of people realize our guts creating gases. Isn't that crazy? Where are these gases going? They're going in our bloodstream. We exhale them. And it's amazing. That's another connection of the gut to the circulatory system, to our lungs. And it's really cool to see how this all interplays. And so really, really exciting and fun to do. All right, I love it. And now we kind of shift a little bit as we go into the nutrition and the really cool nutrition aspect of SIBO. Yeah.
So if we're identifying you do have something going on, you do have those symptoms, we're identifying those bugs, Temporarily, yes. We could alter your diet. And we like to think of it as a reverse elimination diet because it's temporary eliminating something to eventually add it back and hopefully add it back in abundance, or at least add it back in some way, shape, or form. So we do know if you have one of these different conditions, you might actually benefit from certain medical nutrition therapy. So we see a low FODMAP diet, which is a low fermentable carbohydrate diet, where you could ferment those different sizes of carbohydrate chains that could help with both hydrogen and methane overgrowth. So we do sometimes use that with our patients. We do find also if you have fungal overgrowth or you have very severe leaky gut intestinal hyperpermeability, you could benefit from a low histamine diet. So we're identifying, do you have histamine symptoms? How can we eat to treat? Do you have sulfur symptoms? Should we temporarily pull back from sulfur and then definitely try to add it back in after we've really worked with the gut a little bit? Because we know a long-term low sulfur diet, not great for the liver, our main detox organ, really the contractor, the foreman of the entire detoxification process. So temporarily, do we want to pull back on sulfur? Do we want to eat in a low fermentation way? Because that can be maybe a little bit more sustainable and more long term. So we do know it doesn't matter how slow you go with adding fiber, you do want to resolve to add it back in. So whether it is temporary, whether we do kind of make a long-term plan for you because maybe you had very strong allergies or intolerances, the goal is eventually to retrain your gut to tolerate fiber. As you're getting out of gut debt, you do want to retrain your gut on how to balance that spending that it's doing.
And that is what's really special is over the many years of studying this and diving deep into this and then developing these protocols and identifying these various aspects of food and nutrition. That is essentially what Dahlia and Rachel and our really cool integrative dietitians do is work with patients to identify these diets, identify where it makes the most sense. And also, most important is not throwing out, like if you are on a low FODMAP diet, that sometimes doesn't mean you have to take out all things that are high FODMAP, right? So it's
Mhm.
really individualizing this process. Another thing I want to touch on is the importance of the connection to IBD. We don't hear this enough. Dahlia mentioned it earlier, where the progression of this damage in your gut lining and this leakiness of the gut can progress to autoimmune disease and cancer. But typically, I mean, what's happening is IBD is a form of autoimmune disease, right? So those with IBD, we're talking about Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis most commonly, are experiencing a form of autoimmune disease. And in this really cool prospective study done on U.S. government data, so it was on military data and military personnel seeing the doctor, and they were seeing the doctor. They focused on a section of those seeing the doctor for GI related symptoms and issues, and really interesting what they found. So they found about a 860% greater incidence of IBD among those with IBS symptoms. And that was compared to the control group. So if you're coming in with IBS symptoms and IBS-like conditions, you're seeing an 8.6 time increase or 860% increase in the likelihood of that turning into IBD, inflammatory bowel disease. In those who were diagnosed with IBS, they had well-defined IBS. Maybe it's been going on for multiple years. Some have IBS for multiple decades. They were 1,500% more likely to develop IBD at some point in their life. And so also those found with kind of that stomach flu, the food poisoning, or some of these more acute, those having those were at a twofold greater increase of then getting IBD. So again, we are telling a story of connection where it's not just, oh, I have a little constipation and diarrhea here and there. It's why is that? What is that? And we don't want that to progress. It could progress differently for everybody, as we saw in that spiral. It might come out in different areas of the body, but ultimately we're seeing this increased risk for those of you with these symptoms, for those of you, whether it's your body's whispering, talking, or screaming, it will come through these bigger and bigger symptoms and bigger damage to the gut as time goes on. So we really want to uh, take hold of that sooner rather than later.
And we do know studies also show, again, because inflammatory bowel disease is very serious gut dysbiosis. So studies even show 33, so a third of those, 33%, a third of those with inflammatory bowel disease who are in remission. So they're no longer experiencing symptoms, they're considered in remission, they no longer have ulcers or inflammation. They still tend to have IBS symptoms. So again, that really does show that it is that very significant progression. So even if you've reversed one step, you still want to continue working on the gut microbiome and still really addressing what are all the other factors that played into me developing IBD, and how can I continue to improve the structure, the function, the population, so that way I can reverse these things.
This is where we get to the good news, guys. There's hope. There is good news. I know it can seem a lot of symptoms and issues, and oh my gosh, the soil and pesticides and antibiotics. But what's really cool is that there's a way out of this, right? And there's a way to kind of heal with each meal. Who
Mm.
knew? Oh, interesting. Um, and one of the quotes that we like to say, adding more animal products to your diet is easy. Adding more plants can be a challenge. Everyone knows challenge leads to growth. Growth leads to success. So we want you to be challenged. In every aspect of our life, we embrace challenge, right? You don't go to school to not be challenged. You maybe don't start a more challenging job to not be challenged. You don't exercise and go to the gym to not challenge yourself. These things do kind of break you down a little bit, but then the idea is to repair and become stronger. The idea is to learn something new and become more wise and knowledgeable. The same is true with your gut. The goal is to eat a larger variety of foods to then get a larger variety of gut microbes and to help with that structure, function, population. So this is again to reiterate as we kind of move into restoring the gut and diving deeper into that. The idea that we coined and that we do in our practice is reverse elimination diet because so many come to us where they're starting at a low point. They're already starting at a long-term elimination diet, so they're starting with less. And our goal is to say, we want to give you more. We want to give you as many plants. And even if you do eat some animals, great. But what does that look like? Why does that look like? And continue to increase your tolerance to plants and a variety of really high quality and healthy foods. Whereas you see the elimination diet, which can be useful in some small and very, I would say, customized and overseen instances. You're starting with more and ending with less. The trouble is people just kind of stay with the less and stay a little bit too long. And that is really inhibiting and destroying your gut population over time, which is exactly what we don't want to happen. So this goes into why plants, and we have tons of studies, but just some highlights of just really well done studies and all different types, right? Whether it is epidemiological studies or meta-analyses or looking at animal studies or randomized control trials. But some of the really cool things to pop out over the last 15 years of gut research is like eating 30 or more plants per week, understanding the benefits of fermented foods. There was a time where some doctors were like, fermented foods aren't good for you because they're very acidic and people
Salty.
salty and too salty, and really almost discrediting fermented foods that humans have been eating for thousands and thousands of years. And so now there's really great data to show no fermented foods are not just good, they're we would say essential in
Yeah.
many cases of really ensuring you're eating those fermented foods on a regular basis, whatever that looks like for you.
Especially on a plant-based diet, because we do tend to see, people might feel better eliminating dairy, but then where are you getting bacteria in your food? So yes, you do get bacteria in your plants. They live in the skin, in the seeds, in the flesh of the plants, but the concentration and abundance might not be there. So especially if you are on a plant-based diet, fermented foods are vital. So it's so important to be eating them. And now we're being able to quantify them 4 to 6 servings a day.
Yeah, and another great, great studies being done on just eating more plants. So whether you're 100% plant-based or 80% or even 65%, whatever that looks like, of just eating more plants where you're decreasing the risk of disease. And the reason why you're decreasing risk of disease is because you're enhancing the health of your gut microbiome. And literally for every 10 grams of fiber, we're seeing all-cause mortality decrease by 10%. So for every 10, you're getting 10, right? And so that is pretty amazing when we're looking at the data and we're looking across multiple studies over multiple years, and we're looking at thousands and thousands of studies. Um, and really, I do want to touch on animals because I want us to understand what we're getting and what we're not getting in animals. And so really there's four aspects when it comes to eating animals for that we want our patients to understand, especially if you're on more of a Mediterranean diet, you're including animals in your daily routine, which is bioaccumulation and understanding that animals are there to bioaccumulate. And yes, they can bioaccumulate things like amino acids and other peptides and vitamins and minerals, microbes and viruses, but they can also accumulate not so good microbes and bacteriophages, viruses, heavy metals, PCBs, PFAS, dioxins, tumors, endotoxins, right? The list can go on even with that. And especially as we get into factory farmed animals, which essentially is what a majority of Americans and those in first world countries are consuming, the health of the animal needs to be really touched on and going, is the animal you're eating healthy? Because if the animal you're eating is being abused, has tumors, their microbiome is completely in dysbiosis, they're lacking that structure, function, population, are you going to be healthy from eating that animal? Probably
Mhm.
not. This also speaks to environmental factors in that animal, where there's a reason why 95% of our dioxin exposure, which is a heavy carcinogen, comes from animals. We're getting dioxin exposure from animals because we're usually housing animals in industrialized areas, in areas that are a little bit more urban, especially nowadays, in areas where there's runoff, in parts of the, let's say, city or county where no one really wants that land, either because of industry, we're outsourcing to other countries like India and South America and China, where there's less regulation, there's a lot of corruption, the list can go on and on. So we need to be aware of this. We also need to understand, I'd love to parallel this, when you kill a broccoli and you kill a chicken, leave them in your room, which one would you want in your room, right? There's going to be a very different decomposition process in those two living things, right? So the broccoli, yes, it'll decompose, but I guarantee it's not going to smell as bad as the chicken decomposing in your room or in your kitchen, right? That's why we refrigerate. So it's important to understand, when did that chicken die, right? When did that person kill the chicken? Because if you're the average American eating an average chicken, it has probably died a month ago. And it happened maybe in a farm outside of the country. It was then packaged, it was then shipped, it was then processed, it was then repackaged. It was maybe shipped to, likely, if you're in the United States, a fast food restaurant where it was kept frozen, then cooked, then you're eating it. So by all that time that's gone, you're lucky if it's a month. And what is happening to that meat over time is it's decomposing. The microbes are still active when frozen. It's only once you burn them and cook them, the microbes are not active. But I want to highlight right there on the screen, endotoxins. The endotoxins are active. So if that was a sick chicken, if that chicken was not kept in the best environment, even across this food chain, the supply chain, we are going to see issues of inflammation. We are going to see that disease spiral cascade, and then you're not healing with every meal, right? It's the opposite of heal with each meal. So I wanted to touch on these factors that a lot of people don't think about when they're eating animals.
And we have a lot of people out there just saying macros, 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 right? Just eat your protein, eat your amino acids. And yes, those things can matter, especially depending on your body composition goals and your long-term health goals. But you always want to beg the question, what's in your food's food? What's in your food's water? What was in the environment of your food? And that's both with plants and can with animals. So if you can't answer those questions, you probably want to dig a little bit deeper and say, what is the quality of this food or the substance that I am then ingesting, and that is going to interact with my whole gut ecosystem and that whole diverse.
And yeah, and then I'll add, I mean, I eventually want to expand this a little bit more, but understanding in the same way we are obtaining microbes from our mother, right? When we're drinking mother's milk, when we're infants, we're obtaining microbes from who we cohabitate with, including the food we eat. The food we eat is giving us microbes. The food we eat is giving us DNA. You are going to obtain DNA as well as microbes from the animals you're eating. It is a huge, huge impact on your microbiome. That is what we teach in our practice, in our protocols, and our
And
programs.
we actually ran into a friend a few weeks ago who told us she usually eats all organic, and she was traveling and she ran out of food. She was at the airport, so she got a chicken wrap from somewhere. And she said, that gave me the worst UTI that I have had in years. She subsequently had to take antibiotics, and her gut was off ever since. So it really does matter where did that food come from? Who was handling the food? What conditions was that food kept in? Because
Mhm.
one little degree off, and that can have that cascading effect in your gut.
And this is where we go into plant-based nutrients. That's why, I mean, we've heavily studied this, and many of you, I think, are in the know of this, where the animals are getting their nutrients from plants. And yes, you have to be a little bit more aware and diligent, but all of the main nutrients you can obtain from plants or complementing with some supplements. When it comes to B12, anybody, even if you're eating animals or not, you should be taking B12 just because B12 is coming from our microbes. And a healthy gut microbiome can produce B12. We just don't know how much. And really, we're not on the farm, on a regenerative farm every day in touch with the soil, inhaling the soil to be getting those B12 producing microbes that much. We're sitting here at a desk talking on the computer instead of out in the soil. And so we recommend everyone supplement with B12, but other nutrients, again, work with your integrative care team, understand what your needs are, but really these main nutrients of concern that so many people bring up can come from plants and in a really healthy way. Okay. And again, protein, fiber we touch on. Fiber is the essential carbohydrate. Obviously, fiber is coming from plants. Protein is another one of concern, especially throughout our protocols, which we'll touch on more. But protein can come from plants, and really, plants are the OG protein creators. Amino acids are being created from plants. They can be synthesized in animals, but really essential amino acids are, and all amino acids are synthesized from plants and bioaccumulated through animals.
But I always like to give this caveat because, there is a thought process out there, especially in the plant-based community, that if you're eating enough calories, you're eating enough protein. That's not always true. We have different ages and stages that require different amounts of protein. Now, there is more data coming out associating muscle mass with longevity. And that's not the only indicator, because we know bodybuilders, for example, have a very short lifespan compared to the rest of the population. But we are seeing that, there is a connection there. And then depending on your particular body composition, your activity level, and your needs. So I don't always agree with that statement that if you're eating enough calories, you're eating enough protein, because where are your calories come from? If you're eating calories that are predominantly coming from carbohydrates and grains, you're getting some protein, but you might not be getting enough protein for your body's needs. So I always say, especially if you're active, whether you're a growing child, whether you're an active adult, make sure that you're intaking high ticket items, because we really can't compare 8 grams of protein that's coming from half a cup of chickpeas to 26 grams of protein that's going to come from 4 ounces of chicken. There's a huge discrepancy there. So you want to make sure that in every single meal, sure, eat beans, but don't count on that as your only protein source. Get one of what I like to call a high ticket item. So if you are a predominantly or exclusive plant-based eater, you do want to ensure that you are feeding your gut microbes, your muscles, your entire body with sufficient amounts of protein. So go for one of those high ticket, at least 15 plus grams of protein in one item, plus the other veggies and grains and things that you're eating. So make sure that you're eating, whether that's tofu or tempeh, high protein tofu or tempeh. If you're allergic or intolerant to soy, then have pumpfu, which is pumpkin seed tofu. If you can do wheat, you can eat something like seitan, which is a more concentrated wheat protein source if you can tolerate it. Maybe it is protein powders, or maybe it is something like a chickpea flour or one of these bean pastas. So that is going to be more comparable. 26 grams of plant protein for 4 ounces of bean pasta, again, to 20 plus grams of protein if you are eating animal products. So I always like to put that out there. I don't, want to confuse people and make it seem like, yeah, just give up your steak for, a little portion of nuts and seeds. It's not going to compare when it comes to protein quantity, and you might just require more.
And we get into the weeds of which protein powders are better and this and that.
Mhm.
There's so much more. Just know this is still pretty surface level. And just wanted to bring up this great study. And this was looking at, so I want to point out the flaws in this study where this is not looking at your neighbor's backyard garden or the mom and pop down the road that own a couple of acres and are growing veggies and animals and stuff like that. This is looking at large producers of food and their impact and really showing the environmental impact as well as the effect on all-cause mortality and health, right? So we're seeing obviously the lower we want these points to be lower on the graph here, and we're seeing the vegetables and the whole grains and fruits and potatoes and things like that. But we're seeing some of the flaws. Sugar sweetened beverages are there as well. That's not to say drink more sugar sweetened beverages. No, but this is overall just showing the trend of going, hey, plants are less of an impact on the environment when we're growing them at large scale, even in these flawed agricultural systems. What happens if we switch to regenerative systems? What happens if we actually use healthy systems like we mentioned at the beginning? Would we see this improve even more? And our theory is unequivocally yes. So really cool to see some of this data coming out and showing the parallels because we want that connection. The gut is heavily dependent on the health of the soil in which we're growing our food. Further research on the gut, just kind of showing the power of plants here, really, where you're decreasing risk of diverticular disease, you're decreasing the risk of just overall GI issues when you're comparing omnivorous populations to those populations eating more plant foods. And again, going into large population studies of those who are eating a larger variety of plant foods are seeing an increase of microbial diversity and population. We're saying the same things here. The better your gut health is, the healthier you are, is what a lot of these studies are saying across the board in just different ways. So it's really cool to see where we come in is going, I'm having trouble eating plants. Like I'm trying to eat more plants, but I don't feel good. You can be in that gut debt, just to reiterate, where it's kind of hindering you from eating those plants, but you can overcome it. And that's where we get into a little bit more of the weeds. But which we'll get into. But really here we can all agree we're seeing, I mean, these are the top killers in the US. These are the top killers with chronic disease, with heart disease and cancer being the top two still. And just to point out cancer, just with cancer and taking a gut health lens to it, we're seeing really great studies show that really when we're juxtaposing and doing this 10-point healthy plant-based index and showing people eating more plants, we're seeing a prevalent and a significant decrease in total digestive system cancer, GI tract cancer, ancillary. So this topic of ancillary organ cancer goes to why and some of the data backing up that gut health spiral where the ancillary organs are being affected by the GI tract. You can think of the GI tract as this significant river, and really all the animals and all the other ecosystems are feeding off that river, right? Is going to diffuse and really help the rest of the ecosystems, which are those ancillary organ systems. So the list goes on and on. Liver and colorectal cancer, we're seeing that improve with the number of plants that you're eating. And I would say all of these top chronic diseases and deaths that we're seeing from these top chronic diseases really just can be summarized by the USDA data. The latest USDA data says 95% of Americans are not meeting recommended fiber intake. Let me say that again. 95% of Americans are not meeting the already low. We say the recommended intake is already low. 95% of Americans are not even hitting that low. And so everything we talked about today, urbanization, antibiotics, and all these other factors are leading to a decrease in population. But I would say one of the most significant is what you're eating on a daily basis. And if it's not including these healthy, fibrous, antioxidant rich, microbial rich plants, you are missing out and you are increasing risk of a lot of disease. So some of the weeds that we go into with our patients and in our programs is legume digestion spectrum. So there is a spectrum to this, and it's very important. We also have a whole grain digestive spectrum, a fruit digestive spectrum. I'll let Dahlia kind of speak on this and how she uses this, but
And you can
yeah.
see, there's all these symbols, these crazy symbols here. So we're really helping our patients to identify, okay, if you have sulfur issues, be aware of which ones have sulfur and which ones don't. Which ones are
Mm.
high histamine versus low histamine? Which ones are high FODMAP versus low FODMAP? So we really use this intelligently and we say, okay, obviously, if something is very high in fiber, it's going to take more microbes and more work to digest it. So if something is harder to digest, high in fiber, then let's not start there. Let's start with small beans, low in fiber, easier to digest. And let's pick the ones that are going to be easiest for you to digest. So maybe it's a quarter of a cup of lentils or dal, or maybe it is a quarter of a cup of chickpeas. So we're really trying to help people identify, how do we start? Because you have to start from somewhere. And once you start there, then keep building upon it. I had a patient yesterday. I've been seeing her for probably a year and a half now. She came to me initially with lots of food fear. So after having her appendix removed, she just became very aware of what was going on in her gut, and she became very fearful of eating a variety of food. So her diet inherently was low in fiber. She said, I haven't eaten beans, and she was a plant-based eater. So she was predominantly relying on plant analogs and things like that. So yesterday we celebrated a win. She's eating chickpeas and pinto beans and black beans and fava bean tofu with no problems at all. So we had a huge win. We've been building, we've been working on it, and it is working.
This is where we say we all look like fingers from afar, but as we get close, we have unique fingerprints. So yeah, a lot of these are general, but what we find in working with patients for over the last decade is that you all have a unique kind of underlying, let's say, flavor, right? You all have a unique where there's combinations. So of the identified protocols that we've made, you might mix and match, you might switch and change, you might go up and down and side to side. And so that's wonderful. That's your unique fingerprint. And that's why we need more integrative plant-based dietitians who understand this and are inspired by this and learn this. And so that's what we've been working on and doing.
And that's
Yeah.
where we come in again. So we create specialized meal plans where they are low sulfur, low histamine, low FODMAP, or marry the two. So that way we're not just telling people, hey, figure out how to eat low histamine.
Good luck.
We're not just teaching the man to fish. We're also giving fish at the same time
Yes.
until that person is a really efficient fisherman, if you will. So we do have hundreds and hundreds of recipes, and we're able to, if somebody is macro conscious, break down the macros and break down all the ins and outs of what's going into that meal plan. So that way, they can continue to just heal with each meal. And we're really trying to encourage people, let's upgrade the things that maybe you grew up eating or you're used to eating that maybe weren't most conducive for your best gut health. So we're just swapping out, we're upgrading things so that way they're still tasty, they're still nourishing, and they're also really nourishing to your good gut bugs. So we're very fiber forward, fiber conscious in a way that helps to build. So that way somebody who might be starting from a very low diversity can eventually increase to a greater and greater diversity at their own
And
pace.
for example, those waffles are some of my favorite where they look unassuming. Oh, it's just another waffle recipe, but really those are teff, where you're
Mm.
getting teff waffles that are feeding your gut microbiome way more than even a cassava waffle or other waffles, but you can mix the teff and just wonderful ingredients
And these
that are
all our
well thought out.
recipes, our pictures, are things that we're eating ourselves as well, because we also want to heal with each meal along with everyone else. So we've got to be practicing what we preach. So with that, we are really, again, so centered on getting people out of gut debt. We're gut financial managers, if you will, as integrative gut health dietitians. And so, again, in order to understand today, you have to often reflect back because we do know history can tend to repeat itself. And if the history hasn't been favorable, then we want to make sure that we do not repeat that specific history or it doesn't continue to progress in a downward spiral. So that's where we do ask people. My first visit with patients, and Rachel, our other gut health dietitian, we're always starting the first visit by saying, tell me your gut health story. I really want to know, what did your first 1,000 days of look like, including in utero? What has stress and trauma throughout your life looked like? I had a patient yesterday who was so frustrated because she and her husband both switched their diets at the same time. And she said, here I am gaining weight, and now I've developed a new autoimmune condition, and my husband's lost weight, his blood pressure is going down, he is running up the mountains as we're hiking together. And she was just really distraught. And so we had to have that honest reflection. And, she did openly and honestly share. She's had lots of abuse in her life and lots of trauma in her life, and she hasn't quite worked through it fully at this point, and she is in her 60s. So again, the nervous system is going to dictate what's going on in the gut. Then that gut dictates what's going on in the metabolism and the metabolic system, and so on and so forth. So stress and trauma is so important to really understand and speak to and process if you haven't processed and worked through it, because coping skills are great, but healing is even greater. So if you haven't healed through some of the things that you've been going through, then it's hard to heal with each meal if you're not feeling with each meal. You want to ask yourself, what has medication history looked like? Have I had food poisoning? Have I had hormonal imbalance? What's my family history look like? What is my genetic predisposition? Because we do know it plays a small part where if you have the genes, they can turn on and off depending on what else is going on with your gut and with your environment. So you really do want to understand what happened, what's happening now. So we encourage people to keep a food, mood, and poop journal because, again, it's not just the food, it's what mood you're in, it's how your bowels are moving and flowing. So we want to consider that as well. And you want to seek a knowledgeable and compassionate care team. There's nothing worse than visiting a healthcare practitioner and then being like, I don't care about what you're saying and what you're feeling. This test and this paper says you're fine. So you're fine. Get out of my face. Our 7 minutes is up, right? No one wants to hear that after they've been suffering. So really reach out to someone who's knowledgeable, who's curious, and who's compassionate as well, because you don't want then to accumulate healthcare trauma on top of other things you've already gone through. And then again, you want to make sure that your healthcare team is really thoroughly looking into everything they can, turning over every stone possible. So checking different things like your hormones, nutrient status, inflammation, what's your liver, what are all those accessory organs doing? Do you have exocrine pancreatic insufficiency? Did you lose your gallbladder? What's going on there? What's going on with your endocrine system? How's your blood sugar? How's your cholesterol? What are your nerves doing? So really making sure that you have the appropriate blood tests, breath tests, if you need scopes, anything that's going to be helpful. And as a practitioner, I have the ability to order a lot of these, especially functional tests, but I always want to ask myself, is that going to change the treatment plan? Do I feel like this is going to change the outcome? You always want to be wary of a practitioner who says, in order for you to start working for me and with me, rather, you need to have this urine test and this blood test, and you need to shell out $2,000 before I can even talk to you. That person is not seeking to treat you. They are looking only at this paper, and you want to find someone who's going to treat a person, not a paper. So again, you want to ask your care team, why do you want these things? What are these things going to tell me? But really, again, if you trust your care team, you have a reputable care team, then hopefully they're not over ordering things for you, not under ordering things for you and dismissing you. You also really want to try to lean in and understand food triggers or any other types of triggers. I so commonly hear people who disassociate from their bodies because it's just such an uncomfortable place to live. So they have a hard time identifying What does my stool look like when it comes out? Did stress impact me? What am I eating maybe that's causing me some discomfort? So it's really important to be able to reconnect with your body. If you need to do some emotional healing or nervous system healing, then that's so important to do in order for you to just listen to your body. Because if it's screaming, but you have earmuffs on, it's hard for us to understand that together as a team. And then again, you want to be open to whoever needs to be on your team. So I seldom or ever work alone. One, because I can't and I don't want to. I don't have the ability to know everything that these other amazing healthcare practitioners know. So that's where I think people become frustrated with their doctors because they expect them to be a doctor, a dietitian, a pelvic floor therapist, a chiropractor, and they're just not. So really understand the scope and the breadth of work of that person that you're working with. Because I, as a dietitian, I can't give someone a colonoscopy, and that's really important sometimes. I can't do pelvic floor work with someone. I can't adjust their spine, but I have my specific subset of specialty. So you really want to see, do I need to expand my team? Is this one person only taking me so far? And a knowledgeable team member will encourage you to seek out other knowledgeable team members. So it's so frequent that I'll tell my patients, hey, we've done everything we can on your diet, on your motility. I think you're taking all the supplements you need and you're eating all the things that you need. You're doing the breath work, but you're still having little grape-sized stools. So I actually think you need pelvic floor therapy. I think those muscles aren't working in the right way, and we need to teach you to relax them or to strengthen them. So it's so important to really understand who else could be helpful. Do you need some gut-directed hypnotherapy because your gut-brain connection has been dysregulated for a long time along with your nervous system? Do you need limbic system retraining because your nervous system has been so hypervigilant and in that sympathetic fight or flight for too long? Do you need trauma therapy or emotional release? We have a dietitian on our team who does emotional release with people. And we've even heard some of our feedback saying, I've been in talk therapy or cognitive behavioral therapy for 20 years, and 2 sessions of emotional release did more for me than I've experienced with that, or it synergistically helped it, because one is not necessarily better than the other. They're just different ways of approaching things. So really ask yourself, and I think be open to different types of modalities when someone can explain to you why they are helpful and how they fit into your specific life, your budget, your timeline, your capacity. So you really just want to be patient and intentional with your time, your energy, your finances, different interventions. And so sometimes when we are referring out, we're really encouraging people to say, okay, I want you to see this person, a physical therapist, to help with your vagus nerve, or a chiropractor to help with your vagus nerve. Maybe someone has sustained spinal cord and neck injuries, head injuries, brain injuries, and maybe they would benefit from myofascial release or visceral manipulation therapy, some soft tissue release. Again, maybe they do have dysfunction of the little doors that compartmentalize the gut, and maybe we need to do some ileocecal valve release with someone who's trained in that, or they have hiatal hernias that can actually be manipulated and palpated by someone who's more hands-on, again, a chiropractor, a physical therapist, someone who does have more of that hands-on modality. So we do truly believe everyone can heal with each meal.
If you
And
didn't hear it enough, get off
yes,
the preset.
so we live it, we believe it, we preach it. And so some of the things that are going to play into Heal with Each Meal outside of just your team is also what you're doing day to day. So some of the things that we'll talk about with our clients and with our patients are, let's get a diversity of plants. So that elimination diet that you've been on for 6 years, it's not serving you any longer. Let's move forward. Let's eat a diversity of colors and antioxidants to your tolerance, because we need to identify your tolerance. Let's make sure you're eating enough and a sufficient amount of a variety of nutrients. Or so often people come to us who are plant-based and they don't take B12 and vitamin D and omega-3, and they should. Maybe people are just simply dehydrated. Hey, are you having cracked stool, dry stool every day? Maybe you're just dehydrated. You're eating chia and flax and all these beans and fiber, but you're not hydrating them enough. We need to make sure you're hydrating. Maybe you need physical motility and just more movement. So these are all things that we're talking about. We look at, are you eating emulsifiers in excess? What do your artificial sweeteners look like? Are you not sleeping well and outside of a good circadian rhythm? Are you intaking other enhanced substances that could be affecting your gut? And how is your relationship with food? Because again, it's so hard to heal a body that you resent, dislike, are frustrated with, you hate,
Mm.
especially if you're trying to use foods that you're afraid of or you have an unhealthy relationship with. So this is where we also do have these conversations on how are you feeling with each meal, because you can't expect to heal with something that you hate. So if you have an unhealthy relationship with food, we have to assess that. We have to work on that. We have to identify why. Is this from your childhood of you being force fed? Have you had pain or discomfort with that food in the past? So really ask yourself, why do you have these feelings towards these foods? And then really gain a subjective lens of what does count as an inflammatory food, just scientifically and very objectively, where it's not about how you feel about it, right? Is that food going to generate inflammation for you? What's the objective nature of this food? And then subjectively, how do you feel about that food? We need to make sure that we're picking ones that are anti-inflammatory and also not inflaming your emotions. Because I always say the food that is in our pantries, refrigerators, and homes is like a roommate. You've invited that food in to live with you, whether temporarily or regularly on a long-term basis, if you restock that food. And we know just like relationships with other people, our relationship with food can vary. So we can have great relationships with food. And it's just like a roommate, it's just like a partner or a spouse. We've identified, hey, I really like you. You make me feel good. I make you feel good. Let's live with each other. Let's see each other every single day because this is working well. This is going great.
Yes.
So you have a great relationship with that food, right? It makes you feel great. You feel great when you eat it. Good. Keep it in your house. We know, though, not everyone is roommate status. We have certain people in our lives who it's like, I'm fine with them, right? They're my family member or they're an acquaintance and I can see them occasionally. But if I saw them every day, our relationship would not be great. So certain foods are like that as well, right? Maybe certain things we're just eating at restaurants or that's that special occasion food. And I can see it on holidays or on weekends, and that's fine. But if I were to live with it and see it every day and interact with it every day, and eat it every day, not so fine anymore. So ask yourself that. Is your relationship with a certain food strained, right? If I saw that food, that person more frequently than 3 holidays a year, it's not going to look good. I'm not going to feel good. It's not going to be a healthy relationship. And then maybe it's just a toxic relationship, whether that's on your end or the food's end. And maybe just it has to be no contact for a little while. If you're allergic to a food, we would say, maybe that's not a food that you want to be eating, right? Or you're heavily intolerant to the food, or every time you eat it, your joints swell and you're just in bed for days. So really assess yourself. How can you feel with each meal and reconnect with the food? Because if you're coming into every meal anticipating pain, guess what? Your nervous system picks up on that and it will then have heightened pain signals. You will have more inflammation, slower digestion, less complete digestion. So you want to heal your relationship with each food, be able to heal with each meal. So we have a couple case studies, and I'll just quickly, briefly touch on them because I want to make sure we make time for your Q&A. But we have worked with different people, whether they say, I've had gut issues from day one. And since I was a kid, I had an anxious personality, early trauma, eating disorders. First, I felt better going plant-based, then worse. And then they were able to come have a diagnosis with their care team, and we got the right nutrition, right treatment. So this one case, she got pelvic floor therapy, did gut-directed hypnotherapy, and we got targeted supplements. She said best relationship with food in her life, best gut symptoms of her whole life, best gut health of her whole life. Although that could be a case, I've had other cases where they're like, I had great gut health up until I was 35 years old. Overnight, I had symptoms. So this patient here, she was a dancer and she was working overseas, and I think she was in Thailand or an Asian country, and she overnight was exposed to, unbeknownst to her, mold. And so after that, she had debilitating symptoms. Her terrible bloat often doubled her over in pain. She wouldn't wear anything but dresses and robes. She was afraid to eat. And she actually said, I really only feel good when I'm not eating. So I actually just hate eating. She had no relief. She saw multiple gastroenterologists, functional medicine providers, nutritionists, naturopaths. She made a few nutrition tweaks because she just found, like, who cares? I just don't feel good no matter what I eat. So I just eat whatever. I hate eating. I just eat to live. Or yeah, I just eat to stay alive. I don't live to eat. But we found a root cause. So she had lots of histamine and mold symptoms. We got her on a good antifungal protocol that involved both herbs and prescriptions. We got her then eating probiotic food. So once we eradicated the irritator, we brought in healthy bugs. We got her on the right fiber, right nutrients, and motility support. And then she said that was the best she had felt in 22 years after having those symptoms. So cases can be very different. I've had other cases, people who have immigrated here and said that after they immigrated, their symptoms all started. So again, more inflammation. And that could even be involved in things like endometriosis, and that can induce non-ulcerative colitis. So I've had patients with this very similar case as well. So sometimes it is having a conversation of, hey, it sounds like you might have endometriosis. I actually think you should seek out a care team who can help you identify those things.
And I'll say one of our favorite comments or reviews is probably the one at the bottom. Happy to report after having the lentil soup recipe 3 times this week, I haven't experienced any stomach pain or cramping. Lentils were a food that I gave up because I always got debilitating pain after eating. So I'm glad to be incorporating them back in. We hear that a lot. And sub the food, whether it's broccoli, cabbage, garlic, onions, lentils, those are some of the
Mhm.
top we hear, but it's about incorporating it back. You are now reshaping, you are healing with each meal. The gut microbiome can be reshaped, enhanced, redefined, and then you find you can eat these foods again. So lots of other ones to share, but in summary,
Yeah. So again, remember the gut microbiome is our connection to the outside world. So it's going to reflect what's going on the outside is what's going on the inside. And with this connection, we can become our surroundings. Our gut microbiome can help or hurt your entire body depending on how it's been treated. Optimal gut health is vital for proper digestion and absorption of nutrients. And those nutrients are vital for optimal gut health. So it's synergistic. If we don't have the nutrients, we don't have proper digestion and absorption. We've heard eating plants is associated with lower disease risk and especially some of the most preventable causes of death or mortality. So when we hear all disease begins in the gut, it truly can. And avoiding plants is like avoiding debt collection. So it damages your credit score, it hurts you in the long run. And you can heal with each meal, even if you have debilitating gut issues, whether that's irritable bowel syndrome, small intestinal microbial overgrowth, inflammatory bowel disease. And we do know preventing and reducing gut symptoms does require an integrative team and a tailored approach.
and so I want to just go to, yeah, just connect with us, guys. We want to get into Q&A. I know you guys have, I see the chat going. And yeah, our Good Gut SIBO IBS program, which is 100% plant-based, is here. If you guys go to marriedhealth.com, you can connect with us, learn more, and we'd love to get into Q&A.
All right, so we have about 10 or so minutes. So yes, we're going to begin the Q&A. Thank you so much, James and Dahlia, for that extremely thorough presentation that you gave. Really
Thank
appreciate the
you.
information that you shared. So, and you guys also have a book too, correct?
We have,
Yes,
we have several ebooks.
yes,
Several,
yes. Our,
several
our Good
ebooks.
Gut 8, or what was that?
So several ebooks. Are they available on your website?
Yes, you can find those at marriedhealth.com.
All right, great. Thank you for that. So, so if anybody wants, we really have only a few minutes, so we may not get to audience questions. So I'm gonna just go ahead and begin. So, one thing that I'm hearing about that there's some confusion on is oxalates. What's your knowledge on oxalates, specifically, green vegetables? Obviously, green vegetables are a staple of a plant-based diet. And then you're hearing things like, oh, wait, but plants are bad for you, and here's why. And one of the things that they talk about is oxalates. What are your thoughts on oxalates?
Mhm. So it's again an issue of the gut microbiome because if you do have healthy balance in the gut, you can actually break down oxalates with certain bacteria. We are supposed to have certain bacteria in the gut called oxalobacter. So it's specifically there ready to receive oxalates and help you denature them and degrade them. So that way they are actually health promoting and the antioxidants that they come along with are health promoting. It's really in a fractured microbiome that we see oxalate intolerance. And there's a strong association with fungal overgrowth and oxalate intolerance as well, because it just offsets the entirety of the gut microbiome. Now you don't have those key species in there to help you tolerate the oxalates. So it's again, it's not the oxalates, it's your gut, because foods rich in oxalates are really health promoting.
Great, thank you. Great answer. So regarding the gut and specifically the microbiome, how do things like, a lot of times, in modern society, people aren't breastfeeding their children. They're not getting the colostrum, and then they're not feeding breastfeeding for a long period of time, which my understanding is really important to pass on bacteria, healthy bacteria to the child, as well as, I think it's 25% of all pregnancies in the United States or something like that are cesarean. So you're not passing through the vaginal canal. Are those things important, or are they not? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'll kind of this. I'm very passionate about this. I started my career in like women, infants, and children, and just really helping with pregnancies. But in summary, if think of the Bitcoin, think of a house, think of any inheritance you want to give your kids. All of that pales in comparison to mothers giving the microbiome as an inheritance, right? Whether it's $1 billion or $1 million. So that's going to happen with breast milk, vaginal delivery, skin to skin, lots of kisses and hugs, which is easy for most mothers to give as well. And those are the top things you can do and give to your children. There's studies to show that even when children leave their house, so with college students moving in with other roommates, your gut microbiome starts to resemble who you cohabitate with, even more than your own family. So that early cohabitation in an intense dose, which are all those things I listed, is how you pass on a healthy gut microbiome. So, yes, best inheritance possible.
So, and if you weren't breastfed, if you weren't, if you,
Mhm.
if you were born via C-section, can you make up for that? And if so, how?
I would say now I can't say definitively like you're gonna make up for it just as if you were breastfed or delivered vaginally. I can't say that for certain, but what we do know for certain is the gut microbiome is incredibly resilient. In the same way you can take an empty, dry lot and turn it into a lush garden, you can do that with the gut to a certain extent, and I'll let you add to that.
Now we're learning more about the gut. So we're really starting to understand. There's more hospitals who perform C-sections who say, okay, let me swab the baby with mom's vaginal microbiome. So if the baby didn't pass through the vaginal canal, they can still obtain some of that bacteria that is necessary. And we are starting to really look into the infant microbiome because we do know those 1,000 days of life are very structural for our gut population. So we're really starting to assess, okay, if we couldn't deliver vaginally and we could not breastfeed, should we provide probiotics to the baby then, in addition to what else they're being fed? So we're really trying to inoculate the gut with that healthy bacteria that is necessary.
But and I want to say we still don't even fully know what breast milk is made out of and all the benefits. So it's really hard to say, yeah, we can
Yes.
just replace it with formula because we still don't even know everything
We
in
haven't
there.
even perfected formula, and formula has been around for decades. So we still can't mimic the exact same human milk oligosaccharides that feed the good bugs in the gut. We still can't mimic that colostrum. We still can't mimic so many factors in
So,
breast milk.
so really an integrative practitioner, when you're about to have a baby, can identify tongue ties and lip ties, can identify proper latching and proper co-sleeping. All of these will drastically increase the likelihood that you will breastfeed successfully. We want people to focus there, and then it's a very tiny percentage of people that actually cannot breastfeed. So there needs to be kind of a shift in focus, but yeah.
So you spoke about the microbiome and specifically the gut. How does the biofilm around our body, in our mouth, impact what's in our gut?
So I always say biofilms are kind of like little tents. So these bugs can actually zip themselves inside of a tent, and it's a very protective tent, if you will. So even if somebody is trying to eat antimicrobial herbs and spices, or even taking herbs in a concentrated form or antibiotics, these biofilm kind of tents, these little caves that they reside in, can protect them. So now we're actually identifying the important need for things like biophages and things like biofilm disrupting properties. I even sometimes recommend that to patients if they have SIBO and they're going on specific antibiotics or herbs. I'll say, use a biofilm disruptor, unzip their tent so they're outed, and you actually are going to target them and help to balance them back out. So I feel like biofilm is a hugely emerging field, and we're starting to really recognize the importance of eradicating biofilms. Sometimes I actually have patients bring me their colonoscopy reports and they're like, what's that orange hue that's all along my colon? And I'm like, I can't say for certain, but it's probably biofilm. So sometimes we can visually see it, and sometimes we know that it is very likely there, because if you're that person who says, yep, I've taken 3, 4, 5 courses of herbs or antibiotics for this thing and it's not going anywhere, you very likely have biofilm that's protecting that colony.
So, how does things like washing with chemical soaps, using mouthwash impact that biofilm?
So that is going to more or less sanitize some healthy bugs, but also we do know the opportunists, once they have kind of gained leverage in the gut, they will use anything that they can use in order to protect themselves. They're able to survive very, very fraught conditions. So they're going to say, okay, now that I'm in control, let me now take heavy metals, and let me now take vitamins and nutrients and different things that are going to help me create that biofilm. So when we're sanitizing the gut of some of the helpful commensal bouncers, if you will, who are on their own kind of unzipping these tents and exposing these opportunists, then the opportunists have a chance to really fortify and strengthen themselves on their own. And that's why so many times we do see nutrient deficiencies in those who have dysbiosis, especially I would say fungal overgrowth, because they're just going to take people's iron, their vitamin D, whatever they need to really form their biofilm.
And this is that gut microbiome disease spiral we find ourselves in, is because you're not getting to that root. You're not addressing the medical nutrition therapy, that nutrition aspect. So if you're doing, yeah, whether it's mouthwash or other antimicrobials and things like that, but not addressing the root and not addressing the nutritional root, you're just kind of in this hamster wheel over and over again. Because again, like Dahlia mentioned, those fungi or those other bacteria are just going to use that and grow right back, and sometimes even more in more abundance. Yeah.
So thank you for that answer. Something that's gotten more popular over the decades is gluten allergies and gluten sensitivities.
Mhm.
What comprehensive advice would you offer to help manage their dietary choices, and what's the impact on the gut of gluten? Is everyone to some extent impacted by gluten, especially the kind in the United States? Is my understanding, like people go to other countries, they go to Europe, they're like, I could eat bread and pasta and I didn't feel bloated.
Mhm.
When I come back home, I feel terrible. What are your thoughts on gluten?
I think such a big factor in that. Whenever someone does tell me that I can travel overseas, eat wheat there, it doesn't bother me, but I come here, it's really the quality of the wheat that we have. It's the extreme hybridization that has been performed on the wheat, the specific wheat species. We do know that we use high yield wheat, and also we're not appreciating the whole process, right? I think in the last couple of years, people have gotten into making bread, and they see how much love and care and work goes into that starter and the fermentation process and the days and days of work that go in that. When we're factory producing,
Wheat
white bread
products.
and wheat
Yeah.
products out there, we're not enabling, again, that microbial process. Yeast is usually involved in that. That yeast is going to break down some of the gluten protein or the gliadin protein to make it more easily digested by us as humans. So when we're trying to cut out that middleman and say like, oh, all right, yeast, do your thing for 2 hours, and then after that we have to move on, that's oftentimes why people have non-celiac gluten sensitivity or gluten intolerance. Yes, we do know also celiac disease is on the rise, and celiac disease is an autoimmune condition. So that also begs the question, what was the state of that person's microbiome before they developed celiac disease if it wasn't something more genetically involved?
Thank you. And if you guys are okay, our next speaker is running about 5 minutes behind. Do you mind
Yeah,
ending the Q&A for about 5 minutes?
no,
Yeah,
not
no
at
I
all.
feel like you
problem.
have so much more that you would love that you can say. So,
We
all
could
right,
be
good.
here another 2 hours.
Hey, you know what? Let me see if we can reschedule our next speaker,
Yeah.
and we'll keep you here for another 2 hours. So, antibiotics. So, especially, we just got out of the pandemic. We're an antibiotic fueled society. How do people recover? Like, what is the best way to recover their gut health after doing a regimen of antibiotics?
So, interestingly, we used to recommend taking a probiotic along with the antibiotic. And in 2019, there was a really comprehensive study that compared a couple different groups. So, all of these three groups were administered an antibiotic. And with one group, they had taken a fecal sample from them prior to giving them antibiotics. The second group, they were given probiotics along with antibiotics. The third group was given nothing. And so, they actually found that the group that recovered their original microbiome the slowest was the group who took probiotics along with the antibiotics. So the one that got fecal microbiome transplant, analogous fecal microbiome transplant, they recovered it the quickest. You're basically putting their microbiome back in them. You're giving them fecal transplant. But the ones who were taking probiotics, we can kind of assume that it had almost a competitive effect because with most probiotics, you're getting in a handful, maybe two handfuls of different strains, but there's a lot of them. So maybe you're taking 30 billion colony forming units of three different strains. We have thousands of strains in the gut in different amounts. And so when you're just bombing the gut with one specific strain, not knowing if that's the strain that you need, that can inhibit some of your natural strains from repopulating. So what we do now recommend instead, unless somebody has a really serious condition like inflammatory bowel disease or they've had recurrent C. diff, we just say don't take probiotics when you're taking the antibiotics. Let them do their thing if you absolutely need them. And always ask your provider, do I absolutely need this? What can I take instead if I don't absolutely need this antibiotic? But if you do, eat fiber. So eat prebiotics because that's going to feed you the bugs that did survive in your gut and eat probiotic foods. So that's a gentle reinoculation. You're adding small amounts back in. You're hoping to feed these bugs, and then you're introducing more bugs while you take the antibiotic. After you finish, you can determine from there, are the foods doing it for me? Am I feeling good with just eating probiotic foods? If so, continue on. If not, you might consider a
I have
probiotic.
to give a quick visual to that. Imagine an empty field in Southern California, in Costa Rica, in Beijing, in Alaska. What's going to grow there is very different if we just left that field. We've all seen a field be empty for a couple months and then it starts growing native species. That's essentially what we're saying is you have to regrow your native gut species. That's different from your uncle, your aunt, your neighbor down the street. And so the way
If it
we
looks
do that,
good.
if it was good, but ideally, if you're doing that with the plants, the prebiotics, the probiotics, it's going to bring back your native species in higher amounts, ideally over time. You can also help that. So those things are going to help transplant. Oh, my neighbor's farm and garden looks native and good. Let me transplant some of that to speed this along rather than what you're doing with just a general probiotic is going to each field in every ecosystem. I'm going to plant the same seeds. And now you're competing with different plants that aren't even supposed to be there. Hopefully that makes sense. That's just like an
Yeah,
analogy there, but
absolutely.
yeah.
I was actually expecting a financial analogy there.
No
Oh, okay.
financial advice on this.
Yeah.
So, do you recommend against taking, probiotic capsules in general?
No, I would say it depends on the person. So it depends on what they have going on. We know if they have SIBO, if they have dysbiosis, don't take a probiotic. You're adding fuel to a fire. If you're somebody who has significant antibiotic use and maybe weren't eating a diverse diet and you're constipated or you have diarrhea, there's specific strains for specific conditions. So you just want to make sure you're taking the right probiotic. And so you can use data and evidence to really pick the right probiotic for you. If you really want to get into the nitty gritty and try to understand your own microbiome, that's where maybe some of those highly specialized stool tests come in. But I'm not against probiotics. I will often recommend them to the right person. To some people, I say, don't take it. To other people, I'm saying, take this one.
Great. Thank you. And what is a gut-related symptom that people would be surprised was related to their gut?
Mm. There's so many. I would say rosacea could be one of them. The reddening of the skin could be a gut symptom. Hair loss, if it doesn't make sense as far as hormones go. Um,
I would say food allergies and intolerances. I mean, a lot of people don't think that that's related, and it's heavily related. And so that's a big one where it's very close, but a lot of people are disconnected from that. Eczema. What else did you say? You said rosacea.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, those are some big ones where people are like, really? What? Oh, wow. And yeah.
Mhm.
So, thank you. So you had mentioned in one of your answers about fecal transplants, and I remember hearing that a few years ago, and you're like, "What is that?" And so, can you explain to the audience what is a fecal transplant, and what does the research show about its efficacy in helping people with various issues? Is my understanding. So, I'd like to hear what you have to
Yeah.
say.
So I always have to say it's only FDA approved currently in the US to be used for a specific condition, C. diff. So if somebody has C. difficile overgrowth, they have chronic diarrhea that's debilitating and life-threatening, then currently you can go to a hospital, go to a gastroenterologist, and they can either lavage you with a stool sample from a very vetted stool donor. So this donor has to have a stellar microbiome themselves. They really heavily vet donors. So they haven't had taken antibiotics for years. They have a great diet, they're active, they have a healthy body composition. So you're not just getting poop from anyone. It's a very heavily vetted donor. And either you're taking that as a lavage, so it's rectally administered, or you're taking what's known as a capsule, so it's a poop capsule, and it's timed release, so it can really just get into the colon. But we are seeing, I'm always curious out there. So I join lots of different Facebook groups. So I'm seeing people are kind of jimmy rigging this and they're doing it on their own. I've heard people saying, like, hey, my partner is giving me their stool. Well, you want to really be careful because, again, you want to find someone who should have a similar microbiome to you. So you don't want to be taking male to female stool because hormones will look very different. Body composition will look very different. They've done studies that actually showed they did a fecal transplant from mother to daughter. The mother was obese, the daughter was not. And the daughter didn't change her habits, her lifestyle, her diet at all. But after that FMT, that fecal microbiome transplant, she became obese just like her mother. So we are seeing you can actually inadvertently transfer things you didn't want to transfer. So you want to be just mindful and careful as to who you're taking FMT for and always consult with your care team because you could do more harm than good if you just don't know exactly what you're doing.
And this is a poop transplant for those that don't
Yeah.
realize this is transferring poop, and poop is powerful. So you see the power of poop for sure.
Because the poop really is going to have lots of microbes in it. In our colon, we have over 38 trillion microbes. They're a majority, they're like 95+% of the bugs that we have living in the entire GI tract from mouth to anus. So that's really the hub of where they're at. So if you kind of take that medium on which they're fermenting, they're living, they're creating families, and then they're leaving the body, then you can transfer that from person to person, hopefully in a safe and healthy way.
Great, thank you. And now, not talking about fecal transplants, how does being around other people, like you're talking about going to college or going to other conditions, and I've seen information on this about how microbiomes can start converging. What's the impact on that? Does that and how does that happen? And I guess it's kind of gross how that happens, but exactly how does that transfer from one person to the other? I assume it's not just a mental transfer, so there's some
No.
transmission going on.
No, I mean, so yeah, a really great study done on roommates cohabitating. And so before they started cohabitating, they took a sequence of their microbiome as best as we know how right now. And they took it after they've been living. I think they had increments, if memory serves me correctly, at certain months and markers throughout the time they're living together. And what they found is a person before living with certain people resembled their familial microbiome. So it resembled, you could look at a family and go, oh yeah, they have similar microbiomes. They're a family. Very cool. What happened is when someone lives with someone, and I'm trying to remember the exact time frame, so don't quote me on this, but it could roughly even be from 6 months to several years. they start to resemble a gut microbiome like who they're living with more than their family. So studies show this. How is this happening? Everything, all of the above. It's breathing the same air as them, it's being in the same room, it's possibly sharing food, it's touching the same surfaces.
Dishes.
If we could put on glasses and see the microbes around us, it would freak us out. There's a reason why we can't see them, right? It would just be literally everything would be crawling in microbes. And that's not even getting into the virome, which is essentially the microbiome is that of the microbes exclusive of the virome, which are viruses. They outnumber bacteria roughly 10 to 1. So you would see a sea of viruses as well that we're sharing. Food has viruses. We have viruses. Your animals have viruses, and they're all interacting. Viruses are even more interesting because there's bacterial viruses that help to transfer DNA from the food we eat to the bacteria in our gut to then the viruses in our body. So all of this is a transfer of data. What we're missing out on is data. So if you want more data on your phone, it's like your phone carrier offering you unlimited data and you're going, no, thank you. That's like what you're saying when you're not eating plants, when you're not around healthy people in nature. The list goes on and on. You're missing out on a data transfer that helps your
Or
body.
you could have an inadvertent data transfer. I'm really particular. I actually won't share food with friends, even at a restaurant. I'm like, hey, can we all use a serving spoon? No one put your fork in the dish that we're all sharing, because I don't know where your microbiome has been. And I don't think I want your microbiome. I've had patients tell me, I had a friend who had a yeast infection, and after I shared a dessert with that friend, I got a yeast infection. So I'm really particular. I encourage my patients to be particular as well, because unless you really know that person, know where their microbiome's been, and know that you want their microbes and they have a healthy microbiome, be really mindful about who you're sharing microbes with. That could be, again, just sharing food, sharing a drink, sharing an unwashed dish with them, kissing them, further than that. So you just, you want to make sure you're downloading things that you want in your gut.
Or you find those really healthy people and just lick their plates and foot out.
Yes, you two must be wonderfully popular at dinner parties, I can imagine.
Yes, totally.
So with that, just what would you like to share as a final thought for gut health and how people can improve it?
Overall, I like to say, again, I have to reiterate the story of connection. I mean, that's really what this is about. It's connecting with your loved ones. It's hopefully, if you're learning this, it is bringing it into your household, whether it's your family or your roommates, because really it is a story of connection where it's not just, it's great if you can do it, wonderful, but you do want to help others do it because the health of others really influences your health. So you can start with you and your actions, but really have the mindset that it doesn't just end with me. So that's the message I would say. And well, what about you?
I would say, even if you are deep in your gut debt and you've experienced a lot along your gut journey, there is always hope. You can always heal with each meal. It really is just staying motivated and resolving to see that future you, that future healed you. But I really believe everyone can heal with each meal. The degree to which they will heal will differ, but the healing is out there. So, we're out here really ready to support and motivate people. There are so many others who are out there in this fight with us who we're so grateful for. So that's why we put out tons of resources, whether we show up on summits like this, or we have free blogs on our website, or if someone wants to work with one of our care team members one-on-one, if someone is interested in, adding something, a complement to their diet, like our gut nurture that we formulated, I think all of these different things can help you heal with each meal. It's really just you resolving to want that.
Great. And with that, I'd like to thank you for all the information that you shared. If we could unmute the audience so they can share their appreciation.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Sorry.
Thank
I'm not,
you.
you know.
Thank you.